So where can investors, whether they're on the African continent or outside the African continent, get up-to-date information on African equities that are listed? Well, today we're going to talk about that in this video. In November of 2020, I put out a video which was interesting. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange had already gone up 623% in local currency at that point. Well, can you guess how it ended the year? Well, at the end of the year, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange had gone up 1,045% in local currency. Or some might say, well, this is just an inflationary country. There's really nothing here. Tell us the figures in US dollars. Well, wait for it. In US dollars, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange went up 135% for the year of 2020. This is amazing. Of course, in this screen, you will see how other African markets performed. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange was a shining star. In US dollars, it performed better than even the biggest stock market on the continent, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which was actually in the red in terms of USD returns for 2020. So if investors want to navigate and get into these smaller stock markets in Africa where they can actually earn money, which sources are better for them? Well, the ones that I use, there are three sources, and I'm going to talk about them in this video. The first source that I use, which is for everything that I need, African political affairs, African business news, and specifically how companies on the African continents are behaving, I go to cnbcafrica.com, which is it's an amazing website. CNBC, as you know, is of course a big television and a news network that is run worldwide. In the US, it's one of the biggest news networks which navigates breaking news that are coming out of the stock market, navigates breaking news in politics and in business. And of course, CNBC has an African adaptation, which is CNBC Africa, which looks at completely the news that are there that are happening on the African continent. Well, on top of the website, CNBC Africa actually also has a YouTube channel where daily, sometimes they're actually broadcasting for free on YouTube, their live broadcast. So you can actually catch up the closing bell of Southern Africa, which is what they talk about, the roundup of what markets in Southern Africa have done. There's also a closing bell for East Africa, and there's a closing bell for West Africa. So when you look at CNBC, it is one of the most comprehensive sources that I use to figure out what companies have been doing, what executives and management that are running these listed companies are doing, and what country leaders are doing political-wise that can affect any of the stock markets that are major and that I follow on the African continent. The second source that I follow is africanmarkets.com. Africanmarkets.com is a very interesting platform in the fact that it actually does give out more data, of course, than you would find on CNBC Africa or any other source for that matter on African issues. The interesting thing is that africanmarkets.com, unlike CNBC, which sometimes talks about politics and mixes that with business and economic policy, africanmarkets.com looks specifically at the stock markets in Africa. Africanmarkets.com, as you can see here, follows the major markets that are there on the African continent. Of course, you look at the South African stock market, you look at the Kenyan stock market, the Nigerian stock markets, these are the big ones. But then, of course, you look at the markets that have always behaved well, or at least the ones that have given us the best returns as of 2020. You see something like Zimbabwe here, which is also leading again for this year. It's gone up 1.76%. It's in the green. And you also have other green markets, Botswana, you have Zambia, you have Egypt, Tunisia, Morocco. So you have a couple of other markets where you can look at. Of course, if you're chasing returns, but of course, if you're chasing value, africanmarkets.com is also interesting because they actually do have a library of all the companies that you find that they follow on the African continent. And when you go on this library, you figure out annual reports, you figure out most of the information that is there about companies. Of course, when you go to on the markets tab on africanmarkets.com, you can also choose which market you want to follow. So for example, if you just want to look at Zimbabwe, you click on it, they tell you an overview here, also of the currency of what's happening within that country. 1 euro is equals to that, 1 Zimbabwean dollar, 1 USD is equals to 82 Zimbabwean dollar as of 19 January. So they tell you what's happening with the currency, they tell you what's happening with the stock market, but then of course, for these advanced features, the market data and the library, you have to pay a subscription fee of about $5 every month. Of course, for serious investors who are really looking at African markets, this is a worth investment. When you consider that the alternative for getting this data could be a premium service like Bloomberg, which could cost you an upwards of $3,000 per month to subscribe to Bloomberg. And for $5 a month, this could be a worthy investment if you want to follow African markets, if you want to follow the news in specific of African stock markets, if you want to get the data, and if you want to get the annual reports so that you can read through and identify the companies which you think can be valuable. CNBC Africa is good, africanmarkets.com is good, but there's one source which we cannot dispute that will be one of the best sources for you to get African markets information. Well, what am I talking about? I am talking about the African stock markets themselves. The stock markets have websites, they have Facebook pages, they have Twitter feeds, they have all these ways that they have, including YouTube pages that they put out the information. Well, I have looked at most of these sources, and the way I have looked at African markets shows me that most of them are way much more active on Twitter. And of course, Twitter, like any other social media, you can get bogged down trying to follow all the African markets. And then when you do that, you might not actually get all the information in your feed because it depends on what the algorithm wants. And I figured out a way in which you can actually fix this problem. Well, to say I probably fixed it for you already. So Twitter has an interesting feature which is called lists. When you have a Twitter list, you can choose who are the members of that list. So what I did is that I created a Twitter list. Of course, the link I'm leaving in the description below, in which when you go to this list, you will actually be able to follow only accounts that are linked to African stock markets. At this point, I only have African stock markets, though in the future, that is, of course, by the end of this month, I would have added the securities regulators. So for example, in Zimbabwe, the Zimbabwe Stock Exchange has their own Twitter feed, which is ZSC_ZW, as you can see right here. But also in Zimbabwe, there's a capital markets regulator which is called the Securities and Exchange Commission of Zimbabwe. This is another interesting party if you want to follow the news and the changing events around African capital markets. So what I'm going to do by the end of this month is that on this list, I would have added not only the stock markets themselves, as you can see here, a list which goes down Nigerian Stock Exchange, going up all the way to the Egyptian Stock Exchange, but I would have also added the capital markets regulators in these countries so that we create a comprehensive list that will allow you to follow only what's happening. And so when you follow this list, of course, which currently has 0 followers, but if you are interested in African stock market news and you want to have a way in which you just have a list that scrolls through and gives you a quick update, and you want to get off social media, you just want a list that's dedicated to that where no other stuff will be thrown in your newsfeed, you might want to follow this list on the link provided in the description. When you follow it, you'll be able to scroll through. As you can see, what I'm seeing from the list here, I start with the BVRM, which is a West African stock market for a conglomeration of West African countries. Khartoum is Sudan, Zimbabwe Stock Exchange. So I start to get a picture of what these stock markets have actually posted today. The Lusaka Stock Exchange in Zambia has posted its closing statistics. The Botswana Stock Exchange has posted some information, Nigerian Stock Exchange. So this gives you a perspective, a quick way to run through down using social media to figure out what stock markets in Africa are actually talking about for that day. Well, 2021 will be an interesting year. The Zimbabwe Stock Exchange made money for many people last year. Well, I would be lying if I did say that I'm not one of them who managed to get a little bit of some good returns from this market. It's an interesting market, but so are other markets on the African continent where you can still identify a lot of value and where you can still identify some stocks that can actually give you great returns, dividends, also equity growth as you go into the year of 2021. Of course, these are my 3 sources. If you have your other sources that you get your information about African stock markets, do leave them down in the description below so that we can get to learn from each other. But for me, I try to figure out the most efficient way to allocate my time. I try to figure out a way in which I can get this information that is very targeted, information that is very current, and information that can help me to make informed decisions about where to invest money on the African continent. Of course, as the year goes on, we're going to be giving you more videos of how we're going to be trying to explore to get into other markets that are on the African continent, and how you as investors can also be able to get into these markets. Of course, until next time, my name is Maro.